So uncharacteristically, last night I was waiting for 60 minutes. And it was the tail end of the Duke-Michigan State game. And I saw an ad, and I've pretty much trained myself over time to ignore the ads. And then I realized that what I was looking at, which is what you're looking at now, was what is referred to as a digital person. They're created by a company called Soul Machines. I believe their home office is in San Francisco. I know they have offices in New Zealand. And they are, of course, AI-based. And they claim to offer an empathic customer experience. So let's watch just a minute of this.
Can't really hear the video. Were you supposed to be able to hear?
Sorry, go ahead.
I couldn't hear anything on the video.
Okay, I'm not sure why. Let me boost my audio again, and we'll try that one more time. And if not, I will summarize what she's saying anyway. That work?
That works.
All right, here we go. Okay, was that better?
No, you just need to summarize.
Okay, basically what it comes down to is that these are digital people. They are not driven by conventional code, and their design is to ultimately deliver what they call an empathic user experience. So theoretically, if you have a website, you don't need salespeople. Soul Machines can be taught to sell your products for you. So for example, hi, administrative support, admissions help, answering question. Ooh, who needs a professor any longer? So why would we begin a class on business ethics with a conversation about soul machines? Anyone want to take a guess?
Is it because it's unethical?
Well, that's one of the questions we have to answer. Potentially the answer is yes. So one of the articles I want to focus on this week, by the way, is a combination of what did they do with our money, capitalism and welfare in a high-tech, high-touch world, and ultimately some issues that these articles don't address. You may recall that these 4 points are ultimately, as he refers to here, the orthodox case for capitalism. Technical progress drives productivity, which drives growth, measured in the GDP per capita, which leads to increased welfare. They don't mean welfare here in terms of welfare for people without money, but an increase in welfare for everyone. Market competition maximizes efficient allocation and growth. Wealth reflects efficient capital accumulation because high savings leads to high investment, which leads to growth, which delivers wealth. Inequality is acceptable because over time, the rising tide of wealth floats all boats. Now, if you've read this article, you know that one of the fundamental contentions is that this is in fact not the case. It may have been, but it's not now. So what I'd like to do tonight is to begin to get behind this article and behind some of the things that we're facing in our society, phenomena in our society, and talk about the extent to which capitalism may have been transformed, but some of the fundamental assumptions, the 4 that we've just talked about, pretty much remain in place. Is everybody good with that? Are there any questions so far?
All good.
Okay. So let's go back to Henry Ford. We know as we've said before, that he replaced people with systems, essentially transferring knowledge from humans to the assembly line. We've said that there were 2 consequences. One of which is quite clear, a lower cost of goods. But the second anyone remember what we said about that? Okay, we said that in effect, the consequence of the Industrial Revolution humans become interchangeable parts, which means a loss of value and humans become a commodity. Are we making sense so far?
Definitely.
Yes.
Okay. So when something is a commodity and it has less value, there's a sense in which it becomes disposable. So if I'm working on the assembly line and I can't keep up with the pace of assembly, I'm fired and replaced by another interchangeable part, who's better able to do the job. So as one of the articles argued, on the one hand, labor laws and you could argue unions were both attempts to address the problem of humans becoming commodities. Over time, as the article says, general wealth increased. So let's look more closely at that. Between 1870 and 1970, the gap between rich and poor closed. Between 1970 and 2015, or we could argue 2022, that gap has increased. And it's increased on multiple fronts. So the pace of technological increase from 1870 to 1970 is in many ways far more robust. Moore's law, that the capacity of a computer will double every 2 years and the cost will drop in half, may or may not still be valid. That's open to some debate. But however powerful the changes between 1970 and 2022, they're dwarfed by the changes between 1870 and 1970. So, if we look at the average income increase from 1980 from to 2012, and by the way, the trend is not decreased. The top 1% has seen about a 300% increase. The bottom 20% has seen little change at all. And these become some of the things that we want to look at today. Collapsing cost of hardware. Every 2 years, you get roughly twice as much power for the same price, or in some cases less. Zero marginal cost of replication and network externality. So let's talk a little bit about what happened behind the scenes and why this is important. Before the computer revolution, the hardware investment was substantial. So for example, if I wanted to build a factory, I had to invest tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars in machines. Comparatively speaking, by comparison, what I spend on a computer, electricity, and software is a fraction of what would have been spent 75 years ago building a business. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. this becomes an important point, because if we go back to the world of Henry Ford, in fact, how do we judge the value of a company like Facebook? We don't. If you think about Facebook's valuation or some of the other companies that have been bought out for billions of dollars, it's on their potential value, not their actual value. All right, that's a lot to get. Let me stop for a second. Are there any questions or comments? Am I being clear? All right, how about this? Let me give you an example. In New York City in 2000, when I got there, it was called Silicon Alley. It's also been referred to as the dot-com boom, as in. So I got hired by a company called Gist, and Gist delivered to your email customized TV listings for the day. Additionally, you could go to the website and you could search literally the entire world for entertainment, TV, movies, etc., anywhere in the world at any time. I was in charge of their server farm. We had 420 servers and 27 data centers. That I was responsible for. We were uploading 1 terabyte of data a day, which at the time was unheard of. If your local PC had 250 gigs of hard drive space, that was considered unbelievably huge. So we're way ahead of the technology curve, and the company was funded by Deutsche Bank. Anybody know who Deutsche Bank is? Or what they've recently been in the news for? Yes, sir.
Aren't they in the news for like litigation issues? Aren't they in trouble? Them, Barclays, and what used to be the Royal Bank of Scotland.
Yep.
Yeah.
You got it.
I don't know where they're from. Are they German or are they Dutch?
They're German.
Okay.
Deutsche actually means German.
Yeah, sprechen Sie Deutsch. Okay, that makes
Yep.
sense.
Exactly. Okay, so I walked into the CEO's office. I was thinking about leaving the company. And I said, look, we're 24 months into this. We've grown from 6 to 76 employees. We now have 3 floors of this building. And we've never made a profit. And the idea was that everybody who owned a .com became a millionaire overnight. Literally. The parties were unbelievable. The amount of money being spent was unbelievable. They were paying me a small fortune. They gave me stock in the company. And I finally said, I'm going to go. And he said, why? I said, this is not sustainable. He said, Deutsche Bank has spent so much money. They would be foolish if they backed out now. They did ultimately back out. And the company crashed and burned. So if you think about what's happening, if you think about what's been happening, value is no longer actual. Value is potential. I'm going to buy that startup because paying $4.6 billion is cheap when that company is potentially worth 10 times that amount of money. Are you following me so far?
Yes.
That's
Okay.
what a lot of stock prices are affected by that, because like stock prices will be inflated because they take into account the future value of the company. And so like you have a company that hasn't had a single profitable earnings call, and yet their stock is hundreds of dollars because
That's right. And can you think of another industry in which this has been true? And when the crash comes, it will shake the globe.
Yep.
Okay, which one?
Cryptocurrency.
Absolutely, cryptocurrency. Surely a matter of time. And another one. What is an NFT?
Oh God, it's a scam is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
what really is what it is, it's a digital asset, right? So like you pay for, it could be an image, it could be something, and then it's held on the blockchain, right? So it's a digital asset. I don't know how else to describe it.
Which means in theory what?
That it is something that you own but is not tangible, and that like you can see that you have it and you know that you have it, but you can't like physically touch it.
Right. And if I want to put it on my TV, I can. And if I want to put it in a digital frame, I can. I can't print it. I may or may not be able to sell it. But we're back to a topic we've talked about before. We've moved from a physical asset to the perception of value. And part of what's happened which that article talks about, is that we now value skill and the scarcity of the skill, or the perceived scarcity of the skill, versus a car, a stamping machine, a Bridgeport milling machine, an aluminum extrusion machine. And we see this in every aspect of American life, for example, does he produce anything? No. He's defined only by the skill putting a ball through a hoop. There is nothing tangible. And ultimately, James, like every other pro athlete, himself becomes as soon as it is perceived that his value has diminished, he's done. So do you see one of the potential consequences of this? Okay, think of it this way. If this is in fact the mindset, will increasing technology result in a more even distribution of wealth? There are only two answers, guys. Pick one.
No.
I really don't think so, because with the increase in technology, you're just going to continue with the perception of value, the perception of skill, etc.
Well,
And-
also, like, how do you perceive the value of the technology, right?
Well, that's true.
All price subjective.
Yes, it is. Because remember, Facebook produces nothing. TikTok produces nothing. In fact, that's the brilliant aspect of social media. They produce nothing. The value of social media is potentially reaching an incredible number of consumers. But in and of themselves, they make nothing. So if we look at people like Zuckerberg, it's debatable as to whether or not he invented Facebook or stole Facebook. But in either way, there's no product. He's selling access to potential consumers. And Google is doing the same thing. They make nothing. So if you take it a step further, sorry, go ahead. Was there a question or comment? Okay, I wanted to make sure I didn't talk over everybody. So the article goes on to say that there was a time, well, the article doesn't exactly say this, but I've been around, by the way, since the original Apple IIe in the computer industry, which by modern standards was incredibly primitive. But I can absolutely tell you that as a programmer in those days, I had a tremendous amount of value. But what's happened over time is that programmers have become devalued. So we see scripting languages. We see self-compiling languages. Code generators. And now we have soul machines. And by the way, if you've ever used Wix or Square, when you're dragging and dropping elements of the user interface around the screen, all of that work used to be done by a program. Now a code generator is doing that. So where's Wix getting its value? The perception is that it can make more money because it employs fewer humans. All right, let me stop there. Questions, thoughts, comments? Are we making sense? Are you beginning to see the point?
I think it's interesting because so often now, like if I am in need of customer service and I'm on a website, it looks like 90% of the websites, they start off with basically an AI, quote unquote, assistant to try and answer your basic questions. But I honestly can't think of a single time when that AI was actually able to answer my question and instead had to transfer me to an actual human being.
Well, Callie, you're right. And we're back to one of the fundamental problems in our economy, which was engendered from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which is we would rather invest in systems, machinery, now software, than invest in people. That's the reality.
There seems to be this perception that like the machines will always be better because they can't make mistakes.
Yep.
But I've never really truly aspired. I mean, there are certain aspects in which machines have made our lives easier, but when it comes to intuitive, when it comes to questioning and seeking, I just have yet to come across any sort of AI program that actually offers the intuitive nature of being able to ask it a question and genuinely be able to get what I'm seeking.
You're right. I do want to offer the sidebar that there is a technology that can do that. If you want to check out Google Duplex, that's as close as we're going to get to that right now. But I want to put this in the larger context. Back in the day when YouTube launched, my initial reaction was, so what's the point? And then Google paid a ton of money for that. So what's the impact of this? Again, is there a product? No. It's about access to information and indirectly access to potential clients. But what's been the impact of YouTube? I'll give you an example. I'm working for a company that I'm their interim chief operating officer. I was in a meeting today and the panel is a Honeywell Vista FCB 32, and they're trying to link it up to something called a Starlink transmitter. because all of these fire panels have to talk to a monitoring service. It's law. And something about this combination, certain versions of this panel won't work. So what did I do? I went to YouTube and found a video. So what just happened to the consultant I would have called a decade ago? Gone. And in
We've
fact,
been,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, my husband's been able to work on my car by YouTubing it instead of taking it into a mechanic.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a decade ago, the argument was, if you have access to information, you have power and value. And then it became, tell you what, share your knowledge and people will see your value. So now even knowledge is a commodity. So what's happened? What was the Gilded Age? Anyone know?
That was a period of time in U.S. history where like all the presidents, you don't know who they are. Like the
Well,
Gilded
that's
Age
part of
president.
it. It's a time when American culture becomes divided between old money and new, where those people who were smart enough to become involved in railroads, telegraph, manufacturing, amassed incredible amounts of wealth. Vanderbilt, JP Morgan, and others. But it was linked. And by the way, I'm not saying it's any better. It's linked, it was linked to a tangible product. So what we have now is new money, and while Tesla makes cars, Tesla's value is not linked at all to the cars it makes. And think about this too. If you look at the traditional way in which companies are valued, Apple, Tesla, Facebook, and so many of the other companies are wildly overvalued. And the consequence of this overvaluing is that wealth becomes concentrated in fewer and fewer people. So one of the interesting comments my my daughter's husband made. He's a computer programmer. He's been since he graduated from state. And his comment last year was this: roads were built by ditch diggers, hundreds and hundreds of men who worked all day with shovels. It would have taken decades to build the beltway around Greensboro, decades. And now we build in months what could be built in a decade. And his comment is not only that programmers are becoming increasingly devalued, but that ultimately they will suffer the same fate as ditch diggers. So if we were to ask a question, why do I pay you if I perceive you have no value? And retail jobs, fast food jobs, don't have any value. Anyone can do them. And if push comes to shove, we'll automate them out of existence. Again, it is no accident that an increasing number of McDonald's are installing kiosks and eliminating people at the counter. And what we continue to talk about I'm more profitable. I need fewer people. And the other phrase that came into play in the 1990s, actually one was right sizing and the other one was leveraging technology. Right sizing meant I'm going to get rid of as many people as I can by forcing more responsibility on my workers. I'm going to get rid of as many people as I can by making my workers more responsible. And by the way, one of the key words that went with this was this: knowledge worker. What that meant was you had a beeper, a PC or a laptop, and you were on call 24/7. And increasingly, organizations became driven by email. And leveraging the technology meant that you get a competitive edge in part by seeing the potential of technology, but also because you needed fewer people. So if you think about even my own company, no, everybody in my company, one way or another, generates revenue. Now, keep in mind, this is not my choice. Why did I do this? Example, one of my camera bodies is $7,000. On average, every lens we own is 4,000. When I show up to do a commercial shoot, I've got around $70,000 in my car. I'm consistently competing against people with a cheap DSLR in which they might have invested $1,500, who will work for $500 a day. And by the way, lose money, where the average professional photographer survives less than 3 years. But they're constantly disrupting the market. So the impact of technology has rippled all the way through our economic system. Even if I wanted to, my attempt to function like a traditional company would put me out of business. I can't do it. All right, am I making sense? Are there questions so far? We've covered a tremendous amount of ground. We will probably go over a few minutes, and I want to make sure everything here is clear before I begin to sum up.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay? All right. I want to propose that the problem is not capitalism. The problem is industrialization. Especially since the model used in the 19th century was driven by social Darwinism. That no matter what you do, that model of industrialization is inherently a contributing factor, if not the major contributing factor, to inequality. That economic inequality will continue to increase. And note that the article says that land, particularly in desirable locations, is becoming increasingly expensive. And if you look around at what's happening in Greensboro and in other urban areas, if the current trend does not stop, we are headed to a point of no return. And no one is asking what's going to happen when the baby boomers die. There won't be anyone who can afford their homes. The result will be another massive economic meltdown. So if we begin to think about this problem in terms of everything we've looked at so far, the paradigm of the modern industrial nation not only assumes inequality, it promotes inequality. The shift from tangible value to perceived or potential value is making it worse. We're back to one of the fundamental points that we've been making from the first day. Passing a law treats the symptom, not the cause. And one of the questions that we repeatedly asked over the course of the semester was, how do we build a society in which capitalism is human and humane? And it seems to me that one of the fundamental issues that we still have to address is the impact of industrialization. And the assumption in social Darwinism that some people are inherently more valuable than others. That's a dangerous proposition. It leads to places like Auschwitz and Dachau. It leads to underfunding city schools, redlining neighborhoods, the lack of national health care, obesity, because we can't afford the right food because we're being incented to buy the wrong food. Everything is mass produced. One of the last points I want to leave you with, which I found interesting, is that one of the articles links an increasingly alienated society with narcissism. The more insignificant we feel, the more we need to feel significant. I find it peculiarly unsettling when I'm working out at the gym. And so many of the guys in the men's locker room have to go through the standard pose or poses and immediately upload them to Facebook. Or the stereotypic woman who puts the phone down on the floor and records herself doing squats and proceeds to post it to Facebook. I would propose that this behavior is not just a response to alienation, but it's also a response to the fact that humans need to feel valued. And we don't. If we
It's
live in a
the-
world, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's that saying of pics or it didn't happen.
Yeah. Exactly. And go back to a comment we made earlier. In 1800, 84% of the American population lived and died within 10 miles of where they were born. The more industrialized we become, the more alienated we become. In many of the social problems we face, depression, suicide, addiction, obesity, are rooted in the fact that our basic human needs are not being met. And that is not a problem with capitalism. That is a problem of industrialization. Any last questions before I stop the recording and take attendance? Did you all enjoy it? Was this good?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I will stop the recording. We will take attendance.